So you're looking to get into Flesh and Blood, and it sounds like the price point is a very, very rough start for you for the game. Let's go ahead and dive deep into the actual numbers on the real price to get into Flesh and Blood, and even compare it to a lot of other prices from other TCGs on the market right now. Welcome on in, Dragonfolk. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I hope that today is going to be not so much of a ramble as I expect it to be. But what I wanted to do is, after seeing a lot of stuff on Twitter, because again, I think it's just that time of the month where we're back around to it, where people are looking to get into Flesh and Blood, but are talking about how awful the price is for them. They feel like it's way too expensive to get into FaB, and it's way too, out of this world in regards to an entry-level price for people to get into Flesh and Blood and actually be competitive, right? The term competitive there is very much so different for everybody, but something that is very important to people is that they win games, right? They want to win games, maybe even win something like an armory, or they want to win a pro quest or something of the sort, and they really want to kind of rise in the ranks and become a very, very powerful player in the Flesh and Blood competitive space. And I'm here to talk a little bit about the originals, the pricings of everything, and compare them to other games as well, so you have a general idea about where the most popular format and most competitive format, Classic Constructed, stands in regards to the rest of the world of TCGs right now. Now, I'm only covering the top 3 TCGs as of this very moment to compare with Flesh and Blood, so bear with me, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the options you have. First and foremost, before we get into any of these numbers, know that there are now armory decks that LSS is creating that are pre-constructed decks for Classic Constructed, the format that is apparently so difficult to get into, that have unique cards that you can buy for like $40 at your LGS to then go ahead and enter into those armories if they are Classic Constructed and play in them. Now, these are competitive built decks. They're probably not going to win you a Pro Quest. They're probably not going to win you a World Championship. That is the reason they are called Armory decks. I want everybody to think of Armory like a Friday Night Magic, or like a casual night of whatever TCG you play. You just go and you just play, and that's the whole point. There's obviously prizes for winning, but it's not the end of the world. Entry is usually pretty cheap, and you get to walk out of there having some knowledge. So those Armory decks exist, and those Armory decks are continuously being released month after month after month, so that way there are tons of options for people on the shelves come the time they want to enter into the game. This is a great way to get started into the game for $40, and gives you a very, very, very concise way to learn how to play a hero without having to dedicate a whole bunch of money towards the hero. Now, let's go ahead and talk about the competitive side of things. If you are trying to be competitive and win your armories, right? It's all about, first and foremost, if you've never played Flesh and Blood before, you probably don't know how the intricacies of the game work. And that comes with skill, it comes with time and patience and learning. So don't feel bad about losing all 3 or 4 of your games in your armory the first time you go to it. You should expect to lose if you're on a new hero. You should expect to lose if you're just learning the game, because that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But you learn, and the community teaches you a lot about how to play your hero, how to organize everything together, and even gives you options as to the cards that you can add in there for a low cost to start and then upgrade it, right? For instance, the KO Armory deck, which is the only Armory deck that is currently available as of the recording of this video, $40. You can find it at nearly any LGS, and all you needed to add into there to make it more viable for what it's worth is $15 worth of cards, probably like $20 worth of cards. So a $20 upgrade into there gives you a pretty decent deck to give you something that allows you to fight against most of the competition and also still hold your own in battle. Now, obviously, that number can get higher, which is what we're going to talk about today. But just know that these are all decks that have beaten nationals or regionals or any of these things. And these are the decks that most people will net deck and then proceed to go and spend their money on because they do not have the concept of building a deck for cheap first and then getting into the hero later, right? This is oftentimes what you see is when people will see a deck that has just won an event and they go, wow, I want to get into this game. I want to play the best deck. And they go and they buy a deck and they spend somewhere between $100 and $700, maybe $800 on a deck for their first time getting into the game. And then they lose when they go to an armory, and that's feels bad. Nobody wants that. So there's plenty of ways to practice. You can go on talishar.net. That's a very awesome resource. You can go use that to play Flesh and Blood at that level for free and learn how to play the game through those means without needing to go to your LGS. So if you wanted to practice before you go in person, that is a way to do it. Then, of course, you have other formats that you can check into also. But let's get right into it because I wanted to talk about the numbers. I just want everybody to know that Flesh and Blood has other options for you to play the game. So let's start by talking about Flesh and Blood, right? We're going to talk a bit about Flesh and Blood and its prices. So here we have for the US National Championship list that just won US Nationals. Nationals is currently going on right now all across the world. Other decks are coming up and popping up as like rogue fun decks, but this is the one that won the US Nationals. It is $1,070 for its cheapest version of the deck. Then, of course, you can look at all the cost of all these cards. You have Command and Conquers, which are a staple in probably most of these decks. Warmonger's Diplomacy, which is also a staple amongst most of these decks. Art of War, which is going to be a staple in most ninjas. Levels of Enlightenment, which is a staple against the Mystic decks. And you'll see all of their prices for these cards are right here. Now, of course, $1,000 is a lot of money. And if you don't feel like you are comfortable spending $1,000 to play Flesh and Blood, then don't do it. But that's not saying don't play Flesh and Blood. That's saying don't spend $1,000 on a deck that you are unsure about, okay? There are cards that you can replace these cards with to still make it very functional at an armory level without needing to have the actual cards themselves. For instance, as an example, I did not have 3 key cards for a deck back when this deck was legal in the format, and I never ended up buying them. They're really powerful cards and they became staples in this deck. I never bought them, and I proceeded to go again into my armory several times. In 2 weeks in a row, I won said armory without those key cards, and I was going up against other people who were playing the same deck as me with those key cards and winning. So it's all about the skill you put into it and the training you put into the hero, and that's what's really going to give you an edge when it comes to playing against other people at an armory level. So you take a look at another deck. This is the KO deck. Again, KO we had talked about previously having an armory deck. This deck is $660. Now that's like $400 less than the Zen deck that we had seen previously up here. And that is just because a lot of the cards are fairly inexpensive. They all kind of had a reprint recently. A lot of these cards are available in that KO starter deck. So you can always go ahead and check it out there. And then, of course, if you want to get these big cards, again, there's Command and Conquer again showing up. There is, you have Enlightened Strikes, which are also another key card, generic card. And these cards are what make the bulk of it. But the bulk of your deck is actually, if you look at this under $5 mark here, all of these cards down here are cards that are well worth the price. So you'll see that it ends up kind of shaving off that price. The majority of the deck is super cheap. It's just a few key cards that are super powerful cards in the format right now that end up costing a lot of money. We then look at Aaron Grace's, U.S. National Championship deck that came in third, or at least was third or fourth. I can't remember what kind of seed, but this one is $1,270. So this one is more expensive than this deck right here, and this deck did not win. Now, that is, again, more understanding of the fact that it doesn't matter how expensive your deck is, that doesn't mean you're going to win with it. It is a very powerful deck, and obviously it got top 8 in the format, but it is not the deck of all decks. You can play this deck almost the exact same way with just the key cards that are in the base level of it. A lot of these are even under $10, right? So if you wanted to buy 3 Restless Coalescence, it's about $10. 3 Manifestation of Miragai, $10. 3 Rage Spectre, $10. And all of these cards are key cards for the deck. It's when you come into cards like this, and a lot of your legendaries and your cards that you can only really get through expansion slots, or maybe they're really, really powerful cards that haven't seen a reprint yet. All of those cards are more expensive. And that's just how it is. There's Warmonger's Diplomacy again, there's Command and Conquer again, and you'll see that that is kind of the big takeaway from Flesh and Blood, in that you can get cards like Command and Conquer and Warmonger's Diplomacy and Levels of Enlightenment and Fyendal Spring Tunic, and these cards can be utilized throughout several different decks. And that is the beauty of Flesh and Blood, especially with the generic cards. Generics can be used in any deck, but even with something like Levels of Enlightenment is about $30 a card, and you're going to want 3 of them. But Levels of Enlightenment is also a mystic action that is going to be used in probably every single Mystic hero to come out from this point forward. And we already have 3 Mystic heroes in the format right now, which means that if you get 3 of these, you can put them in every single deck that is Mystic, and you'll be in a good spot. For instance, you can play Zen. If you don't like how Illusionist plays, you can switch over your stuff and you can play Zen and just put these into Zen instead. And now you don't have to worry about buying these cards again. So very important to note that a lot of these cards are hot swappable between heroes, and that is the big win amongst all of this. Again, another deck. This is a Azalea deck that got 5th place in the U.S. National Championships, $630, so much like the KO deck. And also, again, the Codex of Frailty. This is a card you're going to see. This is just a really expensive card for Rangers and Assassins right now, so it is what it is. But most of the other cards, pretty inexpensive down here, you'll see. You also have Austin Somers, U.S. National Championship, 5th place. So they either got 5th through 8th. I don't know what seed they ended up in. But this deck was only $450. So you'll see that even decks that are at $450, a mere fraction of the cost of any of these additional cards up here, are really still able to make it into these top tables for the format. You just need to know what your deck does and how to do it well, right? What your matchups look like and how they work out. Another thing that you can even look at is Blitz, right? Now, there hasn't been a big Blitz event for a while, and Skirmish season is coming up. Blitz is a young format version of Classic Constructed, not as played here in the States, but it is still a certain, a favorite amongst people. And even these decks, $620, $700, $380. So you're looking somewhere between $300 and like $1,000 some dollars for most of any of these decks of Flesh and Blood. But these are competitive winning decks. They've won big competitive events, or at least top 8 competitive events. And that is the real takeaway from all of this, in that you have to know that what your hero does and how they do it in order for you to make it to these top 8s. Another thing I also want to mention is that if we really looked at the price of these decks may be $1,000, right? They may be up to $1,000, but you know what else is also a lot of money? Traveling to these events, right? This U.S. Nationals Championships was in Minneapolis, and it is a drive for most people. Some people it's in their backyard, but it's a drive or a flight for most people to get out there to play. And lo and behold, we have them hosted all over the world. So If you're not in that general area, you're going to have to do some traveling. Maybe you're going to have to stay at a hotel or some Airbnb. You're going to have to provide food for yourself. You're going to have to do that. And unless you're sponsored or, somebody's just helping you pay the bills to get along the way, or maybe you've sold enough stuff or make enough money, then it's still going to cost you a lot of money to go to these highly competitive events, which is why when you look at this number right here, this is how much money I need to spend to play in an armory. You instead need to realize that this is how much money you may need to spend to play into the big leagues. And even then, you look at a deck like Austin Summers' Prism deck, $450. You don't need to pay that much. You just need to find something you like to play, find something you're comfortable with, and play it. So now we get into the part where we're going to compare it to the other TCGs, right? First, let's go ahead and just start off by comparing it to Yu-Gi-Oh! This is Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta.com. It's going to tell me what some of the meta decks are like. This is a first place deck for the Indianapolis Regional that happened recently, and it's a $553 deck. Then you look at these decks here, 226, 397, 364, 605. All of these have right around that same rate of somewhere between $300 to $700 in order for you to play these decks. And these are all first place winning big decks that happened at these events, at regionals and so on and so forth. And these are like the decks to beat. Again, TCGs, they cost money for you to play them. That's just how it is. Then let's move into Pokemon. Now, Pokemon is always the contending force into this, because when people talk about the Flesh and Blood TCG and how expensive it is, they always end up comparing it to Pokemon, which is by and large the cheapest TCG to get into to date. And the reason being is because, as far as I know, Pokemon, they will overprint a lot of their product so they can get into everybody's hands. They have them all over big box stores, all over LGSs. They're selling them all over the place. And the cards are incredibly inexpensive to get at their base rarity, right? At their base version. So that way people can play. But of course, if you wanted to bling out your deck in Pokemon, it's going to cost you a little bit more. Now, I'm not sure what the print values are for all these things and how this works, but these are decks that are big into the meta as of right now. You have a Gardevoir deck that goes for about $45. You have Lost Zone Box, which goes for about $70. You have Lugia Archeops, which is about $84. Raging Bolt Ogerpon, which is about $100, probably the most expensive one I've seen as of right now. And then Charizard Pidgeot, which goes for $75. So you'll see comparatively, it's a tenth of the cost to play Pokemon compared to Flesh and Blood. But if your whole thing, and I mean this when I say it, if your whole thing is comparing it to Pokemon every single time you want to get into another TCG, maybe you should just go back to playing Pokemon. Because at that point, it sounds like you really are trying to defend how that game runs, and not every TCG is going to be like Pokemon. If every TCG was like Pokemon, you would see everything be like Pokemon. I'm not saying that it's bad to compare, that it's bad or good to compare things, but when you look at the ease of access to get into a highly competitive situation for Pokemon, you can get into it for less than $100. The problem is, though, is again, if you're looking to be highly competitive in Pokemon, you are going to need to still pay for travel and for room and your food and all that stuff. And so if you don't have to go far and you're looking for just a casual thing to get into, sure, you could play Pokemon for that amount. But this also rotates, and you're going to have to buy all new cards when they end up getting, some new set to come out after their most recent rotation. It's another thing with Flesh and Blood is Flesh and Blood does not have a rotation. They are an eternal format. So the only thing that happens is that if they get Living Legend points and a certain hero hits Living Legend, they are no longer able to be used in the format. But that doesn't happen super quickly. Usually it ends up taking a little while for that to happen, so you're able to play that hero for quite some time in the meta. So now that we've looked at Pokemon and we've looked at Yu-Gi-Oh, let's take a look at Magic. Now, Magic being probably the #1 and one of the more competitive games out of these. Now, let's take a look at their standard. Now, there are 3 formats in Magic the Gathering: Standard, Pioneer, and Modern. All of these having their own different rotations and, bans and suspendeds and so on and so forth based on power level. So if we look at the tier 1 decks here for Standard, which is a format that's based around rotation, this sits at about anywhere from $250 to about $500 for playing in Standard if you want like a tier 1 deck. Of course, there are several other decks down here that are tier 2 that sit right around that same range. Of course, you do have red deck wins decks, which tend to do very well. It's just, play red burn cards and do damage. That's just it. The cards tend to not be very expensive, but even still, it's a tier 2 deck. It's something you can build, but most people stick around this tier 1 range if you're going to net deck, and they look at stuff like this. Now let's take a look at Pioneer. Pioneer has some older cards in it, and it's not by much, but it does allow for more cards that have not been reprinted in a while to be put into these decks, and it's got a bigger card pool, and it seems to be a little bit more competitive as far as things go. These have their top 4 decks in tier 1. They range anywhere between $300 to $700. So you're seeing that price get a little bit up there. Now, I personally believe that if you're looking to start into Flesh and Blood, that's kind of the range in which you're looking to be. $300 to $700 can get you a really, really awesome deck for any hero you want for $300 to $700. Easy, easy, easy. And then you'd be playing at this exact same level for Pioneer. But if you really want to compare the big leagues of Magic the Gathering to the big leagues of Flesh and Blood, you're looking at Modern. Modern is the format in which you need to look at, because Modern is probably, outside of Commander, the most popular constructed format, the 1v1 constructed format for Magic the Gathering. And it contains a lot of really old cards. A lot of the cards are printed directly into this format, so they get new cards right off the bat. They use any of the new sets that come out. They have a bunch of older sets back from like 2001. So very powerful stuff. And you'll see that in this tier 1 deck, you've got a lot of cards, a lot of decks that go for somewhere between 5, maybe to even 1,000, right? You've got this Eldrazi Tron, which is about $1,200. You've got this Nadu Shuko combo, which comes in for about $1,000. All of these decks have results, and they're all right around that same price of a Flesh and Blood deck, somewhere between that $400, $500 to $1,000 deck. Now, if you think that Flesh and Blood is too expensive to get into at a competitive level, and you look at these same things for Modern, for Magic the Gathering, like probably the most popular TCG to date, what is your response to that? Do you think that there should be some way that people are able to be competitive? If your whole thing is that you want to play Flesh and Blood for cheap, and I'm talking cheap, dirt cheap, okay? Get you and your friends together, buy some Blitz decks, and you can play Blitz decks against one another. You can even go and find commoner events in your area. If you look on the FaBtcg website, you can go there and find an event locator that might be playing commoner near you. And if they are playing commoner, I suggest calling the store, asking to see if they are still playing commoner. Find a commoner deck online that you can buy for $10, because most commoner decks stand between $10 to $20, and you can just get that deck, go to that store, and play competitively in commoner. But if you don't want to spend money on a TCG, and you keep comparing every TCG to the cheapest TCG being Pokemon, then you're not helping your own case, because other TCGs are not doing what Pokemon does, and they're just as popular. So it's not up to the rest of the world to make every TCG cheap. Cards want to have value. People want their cards to have value. And this is a way that they're going to be doing that. Are some of these cards able to be reprinted later down the line? Sure, right? They could very well have that happen. But for right now, in the moment when you're looking at these things, you need to know that the price of the deck does not equal the power of the deck. It does not matter what your price is that you're putting into it. If you start in Flesh and Blood by just getting a very budget list of like, if you're just buying the KO Armory deck or the Bolton Armory deck or the Azalea Armory deck, and you go and you spend $30 more to put some extra goodies into those decks, you spent $70 total on your decks. And now you can go ahead and continue to start upgrading and seeing where the power lies within your playstyle. You can also use those same cards in other classes. For instance, if you don't like Azalea, a ranger, you can always go ahead and try out Riptide, who is another ranger who focuses on a different kind of playstyle. This is all based around how you want to play the game. And things change day in, day out. Every single time a new set is released, things change. Prices spike for certain heroes, prices drop for other heroes. It's always changing. So realize that not everything is going to be like Pokemon. And if you want everything to be like Pokemon, go play Pokemon, because that's where you're going to be happy. You're going to be happy playing Pokemon. But if you want to at least try Flesh and Blood at a budget level, there's Commoner, there's Clash, the fan-made format, which I am a committee member for and have been advocating on this, this channel for a while. There's several Blitz Precon events that you can go to. There's Draft, there's Sealed. There's all these things that you can play for the game without needing to break the bank and still have a competitive time playing the game. So if any of those things interest you, let me know in the comments down below. And if you're still upset about the price of Flesh and Blood, I don't know what to tell you. Cards are going to be worth money. That is the purpose of most of these TCGs. And if you're going to be trying to get into the big leagues, expect to spend a little bit of money. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Make sure to hit that like button down below. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel as well while you are at it. And then again, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. I know this is kind of a ranty little 30-minute video, but I really wanted to get this off my chest and talk about a very, very hot topic because, my gosh, it just seems that nobody understands. So if you are interested in Flesh and Blood, let me know in the comments down below. I can give you several resources as to how to make your deck very inexpensive to start, and even ways to grow that deck as you go through the game. But if you don't care about any of that, and you only care about bashing the game strictly because it's way more expensive than the cheapest TCG on the market, then you know what? Talk to me about that too, because your comment also counts. So thanks, everybody. I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. If you want to give me money instead of a TCG, you can become a channel member, and you can go ahead and join that. There are special member-only videos available for everybody, on top of some awesome emotes and loyalty badges that you guys can utilize when I am live. So thank you all so much for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure talking about such a silly, silly topic in such an expensive hobby that all TCGs are. And hopefully you learned something today. Take care. Remember to have fun in the Flesh and Blood. And I'll see you all very soon. Nerd out.